Admiral Zektar stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of the Imperial Dreadnought Dominion. The blue light cast eerie shadows across his scaled face as he studied the tactical readout. 3,000 ships of the Galactic Empire hung in perfect formation around Earth's solar system, their weapons charged and ready. Such a small, insignificant world, he muttered to his second-in-command, Commander Veloth. How did these humans manage to refuse our generous offer of surrender? The message from Earth had arrived just hours ago. A simple, defiant response to the Empire's ultimatum. We decline your offer. Come and take it. Zektar had served the Empire for over 2 centuries. He had conquered 47 worlds, each one falling within days of his arrival. The pattern was always the same. His fleet would arrive, display their overwhelming power, offer terms of surrender, and watch as the local government quickly capitulated. The Empire's reputation preceded them across the galaxy, and few species were foolish enough to resist. But these humans were different. Intelligence reports painted them as a young species, barely 300 years into space travel. They had only recently developed faster-than-light technology and possessed maybe 50 warships total. By all calculations, this should be the easiest conquest in Imperial history. Yet something nagged at Zektar. His scouts had been monitoring human transmissions for weeks, and what they heard didn't match the behavior of a species about to surrender. Instead of panic, there was preparation. Instead of despair, there was determination. Admiral, Veloth interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving another transmission from the third planet. Put it through. The hologram shifted to show a human female in a crisp military uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held no fear as she looked directly at the camera. Behind her, Zektar could see the bustling activity of what appeared to be a military command center. I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force, she said, her voice steady and clear. I assume you're Admiral Zektar of the Galactic Empire. Your reputation precedes you. Zektar was surprised. Most species trembled when forced to communicate with him. This human spoke as if they were equals discussing the weather. Indeed, I am Admiral Zektar, he replied, allowing his voice to carry its usual menacing tone. You should know that resistance is futile. My fleet has conquered worlds with 10 times your military capacity. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with mercy. Admiral Chun tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Admiral, I've studied your previous campaigns. Very impressive, really. But I think there might be something you don't understand about us humans. And what would that be? We have a saying on Earth. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. We've never been very good at surrendering, even when the odds are against us. Zektar felt a flicker of annoyance. Your primitive sayings will not protect you from our weapons, human. You have 6 of your hours to reconsider. After that, we will take your world by force. 6 hours, Admiral Chun repeated thoughtfully. That should be enough time to show you what humans do when someone threatens our home. The transmission ended, leaving Zektar staring at the empty hologram. Something about the human's confidence bothered him, but he pushed the feeling aside. No matter how brave they pretended to be, they couldn't overcome such overwhelming odds. On Earth, Admiral Chun turned from the communication console to face her staff. The command center buzzed with activity as officers coordinated defensive preparations across the planet and throughout the solar system. Well, asked General Morrison, her second-in-command. Think we got their attention? Oh, we definitely got their attention, Chun replied. The question is whether they're paying attention to the right things. She walked over to the main tactical display, which showed the deployment of Imperial forces around Earth. 3,000 ships arranged in a classic siege formation, just like their intelligence had predicted. The Empire followed the same playbook every time, which was both their strength and their weakness. Status report on the outer system defenses? Chun asked. All asteroid mining stations have been evacuated and converted according to plan, reported Colonel Kim. The Jupiter orbital platforms are fully operational, and the Saturn ring installations are standing by. And our fleet. All 57 ships are in position. The Constitution and her battle group are holding at Luna, while the smaller squadrons are distributed according to Defense Plan Charlie. Chun nodded. 57 ships against 3,000. On paper, it looked hopeless. But humans had never been ones to fight fair when their survival was at stake. What about our special assets? General Morrison smiled grimly. The volunteers are ready. Every single person who applied was accepted, even though they knew the odds. How many? 12,000. From every nation, every background. Pilots, engineers, soldiers, even some civilians who insisted on joining. The youngest is 19, the oldest is 73. Chen felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. In 6 hours, many of those brave souls would be dead. But their sacrifice might buy enough time for the plan to work. And the project status? Dr. Hassan confirms that all preparations are complete. The moment the Empire makes their move, we can activate the system. Chen turned back to the tactical display. The Empire's scouts had been thorough in their reconnaissance, but they had focused on military assets and population centers. They had cataloged Earth's warships, mapped the defensive satellites, and identified key strategic locations. What they hadn't noticed were the modifications being made to seemingly civilian infrastructure. For the past 6 months, ever since first contact with Imperial scouts, humanity had been preparing for this moment. While diplomats had stalled for time with negotiations, engineers and soldiers had worked around the clock to implement Defense Plan Charlie. The plan was simple in concept. If the Empire wanted Earth, they would have to pay a price that would shock the galaxy. Humanity might not have the strongest military, but they had something else that had served them well throughout their violent history. They were absolutely ruthless when their backs were against the wall. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Commander Patel from the communications station. "We're getting reports from our observers throughout the galaxy. Word about the standoff here is spreading fast." "Good," Chen replied. "Let them watch. If we're going to make our last stand, we might as well make it memorable." She thought about the message that would soon be broadcast to every corner of human space and beyond. The message that would tell the galaxy exactly what humanity was prepared to do rather than surrender to tyranny. The clock on the command center wall showed 5 hours and 37 minutes until the Imperial ultimatum expired. Around the solar system, 12,000 volunteers made final preparations for missions from which they would never return. In hidden installations on asteroids and moons, weapons systems powered up that the Empire's scouts had never detected. And, on Earth itself, in cities and towns around the globe, ordinary people went about their daily lives with the quiet determination that had carried humanity through every dark chapter of their history. They knew what was coming. They knew the odds. And they had made their choice. Admiral Chen looked out through the command center's reinforced windows at the blue sky above. Somewhere up there, 3,000 alien warships waited to rain destruction down upon everything she had ever loved. In a few hours, that sky would be filled with fire and death. But the Empire was about to learn something about humans that their intelligence reports had failed to capture. When faced with extinction, humanity didn't despair. They got angry. And an angry human was one of the most dangerous things in the universe. Back on the Imperial flagship, Admiral Zektar reviewed the final intelligence reports on human military capabilities. Everything confirmed what he already knew. This would be a massacre, not a battle. The humans had decent technology for their age, but they simply lacked the numbers to mount any meaningful resistance. Still, something about Admiral Chen's confidence bothered him. In his centuries of service, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were telling him that something was wrong with this picture. "Veloth," he called to his second-in-command. "Have our scouts detected any significant military movement in the outer system?" "Negative, Admiral. Some minor adjustments to defensive positions, but nothing that would change the tactical situation. Their outer system installations appear to be civilian mining and research facilities." Zektar nodded, but the feeling of unease persisted. He had seen desperate species before, and they usually fell into one of two categories: those who begged for mercy and those who raged impotently against their fate. But the humans seemed almost eager. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, "the fleet is requesting permission to begin the preliminary bombardment. All ships are in position and ready to commence operations." Zektar checked the chronometer. Still 4 hours until the ultimatum expired, but perhaps an early show of force would convince the humans to see reason. "Negative. We wait for the full-time limit to expire. The Empire keeps its word, even to primitives. What he didn't say was that he wanted those 4 hours to observe human behavior. Every species had tells, patterns that revealed their true intentions. If the humans were planning some sort of desperate last gesture, he would be ready for it. On one of Jupiter's smaller moons, Chief Engineer Maria Santos put the finishing touches on what looked like a standard mining laser array. To Imperial scouts, it would appear to be exactly what it was supposed to be: industrial equipment for harvesting ice and minerals. What those scouts couldn't see were the modifications Santos and her team had spent 3 months implementing. The mining laser now had 10 times its original power output, military-grade targeting systems, and armor plating that could withstand everything short of a direct hit from a capital ship's main guns. "How many more installations like this are operational?" asked Captain Torres, the military liaison assigned to oversee the project. 47 completed, 3 more coming online within the hour, Santos replied. Every major asteroid, moon, and orbital platform in the outer system has been converted. The Empire's going to get a very unpleasant surprise when they realize their helpless targets are shooting back. Torres nodded grimly. It wasn't much compared to 3,000 warships, but it was better than rolling over and surrendering. More importantly, it would buy time for the real plan to unfold. "Any word from Dr. Hassan's team?" he asked. "Last report came in an hour ago. Project Atlas is ready for activation on Admiral Chen's command. The question is whether we'll live long enough to see if it works." Captain Torres looked out through the observation window at the massive gas giant hanging in space above them. Somewhere out there, probably hidden in Jupiter's radiation shadow, Imperial ships were watching and waiting. In a few hours, this peaceful industrial site would become a battlefield. "Chief, I want you and your people to evacuate to the inner bunkers once the shooting starts. This installation is automated now. No need for any of you to stay and get killed operating it." Santos shook her head firmly. "With respect, Captain, we built this thing. We know its capabilities and limitations better than any computer. My people stay." "Chief, this isn't a debate. I have orders to—" "Your orders," Santos interrupted, "are to maximize the effectiveness of these installations against Imperial forces. That happens best with experienced operators at the controls, not automated systems. My people knew what they were signing up for when they volunteered for this assignment." Torres wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Every advantage mattered when facing such overwhelming odds. Still, it felt wrong to ask civilians to stand and fight against impossible odds. As if reading his thoughts, Santos smiled. "Captain, my grandfather fought in the Pacific during World War II. My father served in the Mars colonial wars. My daughter is currently aboard the Constitution getting ready to take on 3,000 Imperial ships. Fighting for freedom runs in my family. I'm not about to break that tradition now." Back on Earth, Dr. Amira Hassan made final adjustments to the most ambitious and dangerous project in human history. Project Atlas had begun as a theoretical exercise in physics, but the threat of Imperial invasion had transformed it into humanity's ultimate weapon. The installation stretched for kilometers beneath the Australian outback, hidden from orbital observation by carefully placed camouflage and decoy structures. To Imperial scouts, the area appeared to contain nothing more interesting than geological research stations and mining equipment. The reality was far different. Buried deep in the planet's crust was a device that could, in theory, turn the Earth itself into a weapon. The physics were sound, the engineering was solid, but the device had never been tested at full power. The first activation would either save humanity or destroy the very planet they were trying to protect. Dr. Hassan called her assistant, Dr. Martinez. "We're getting fluctuations in the quantum field stabilizers. Should we run another diagnostic?" Hassan checked the readings on her tablet. Everything was within acceptable parameters, but the margin for error was terrifyingly small. One miscalculation, one component failure, and the resulting explosion would crack Earth like an eggshell. "No more diagnostics," she decided. "We've tested everything we can test without activating the system. At this point, we either trust our work or we don't. And if we're wrong?" Hassan looked around the control room at the team of scientists and engineers who had volunteered to stay and operate Project Atlas. Every one of them knew they were volunteering for a suicide mission. When Atlas activated, the massive energy release would kill everyone within 50 kilometers of the installation. If we're wrong, then at least we'll die free instead of living as slaves, she said simply. The countdown clock on the wall showed 3 hours and 18 minutes until the Imperial ultimatum expired. Soon, Admiral Chun would give the order that would either save humanity or end it. Either way, they would face their fate on their own terms. On the bridge of the UEDF flagship Constitution, Admiral Chun reviewed the final deployment reports from across the solar system. Every human ship was in position, every hidden installation was ready, and every volunteer had confirmed their readiness for the mission ahead. The odds were still impossible. Even with all their preparations, their secret weapons, and their desperate courage, humanity was facing annihilation. But sometimes impossible odds were exactly what was needed to achieve the impossible. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. It's the final authorization codes for Project Atlas." Chin took a deep breath. Once she input those codes, there would be no turning back. Humanity would either rise to take its place among the great powers of the galaxy, or it would die in a blaze of glory that would be remembered until the end of time. "Confirmed," she said, entering the codes into her command console. "Project Atlas is now authorized for activation on my mark." Around the solar system, 12,000 volunteers made their final preparations. In hidden installations, weapons powered up for the first and last time. And deep beneath the Australian outback, Dr. Hassan's hand hovered over the activation switch that would either save their world or destroy it. The Empire wanted to conquer humanity. They were about to learn why that might have been a mistake. Admiral Zektar watched the chronometer count down the final minutes of the ultimatum. Still no sign of surrender from the humans, no last-minute pleas for mercy. Instead, his sensors were detecting increased activity throughout the human system. Ships adjusting positions, communications traffic spiking, and energy readings from various installations showing unusual patterns. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting some anomalous readings from several locations in the outer system. Nothing clearly military, but the energy signatures are unusual." Define unusual. "High-powered industrial equipment showing activity levels well above normal operational parameters. Could be preparations for evacuation or resource denial, but the pattern is inconsistent with standard procedures." Zektar frowned. Resource denial was a common tactic among species facing conquest, destroying valuable assets to prevent them from falling into Imperial hands. But something about these readings felt different. What about their fleet? No significant movement. All identified human vessels remain in defensive positions. They appear to be preparing for a conventional engagement. A conventional engagement. 57 human ships against 3,000 Imperial vessels. It would be over in minutes, and everyone involved knew it. So why were the humans acting as if they had a chance? The chronometer reached 0. "Time," announced the tactical officer. Zektar stood and straightened his uniform. Around the solar system, 3,000 Imperial warships awaited his orders. This was the moment he had experienced dozens of times before, the moment when overwhelming power met desperate resistance and crushed it. "Open a channel to all ships," he commanded. "Today we add another world to the glory of the Empire. Remember, we are here to conquer, not to destroy. Minimize damage to infrastructure and population centers. Begin the assault." The order went out across the Imperial fleet, and 3,000 warships began their advance toward Earth. It was, Admiral Zektar reflected, almost anticlimactic. In an hour or two, it would all be over, and he would be filing yet another routine conquest report. He had no idea that he was about to participate in the most important battle in galactic history. On Earth, Admiral Chun watched the tactical display as Imperial forces began their approach. The outer picket ships were moving first, probing for weaknesses in human defenses. Behind them, the main battle fleet advanced in perfect formation, their weapons already charging for the coming engagement. "All stations, this is Admiral Chun," she broadcast across the human fleet. "The time for talk is over. Today we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for the right of every free species in the galaxy to remain free. Make it count. The response came back from 57 ships scattered across the solar system. Roger that, Admiral. See you on the other side. Admiral Chun turned to her weapons officer. You may fire when ready. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first shot of the war came not from the massive Imperial dreadnoughts, but from a seemingly innocent mining platform orbiting Europa. The modified industrial laser that Chief Engineer Santos had spent months perfecting lanced out across space with devastating precision, striking an Imperial scout ship that had moved too close to Jupiter's radiation belt. The scout ship's shields flared brilliant white, then collapsed completely as the unexpected assault overwhelmed its defenses. The vessel tumbled end over end, its hull cracked open like a broken egg, before exploding in a brief flash of superheated plasma. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship Dominion, Admiral Zektar stared at the tactical display in shock. The destroyed scout ship's icon had simply vanished, replaced by the expanding debris signature of a total loss. Report, he barked. Sir, the Swift Hunter has been destroyed. We're detecting weapons fire from a civilian mining installation. Energy output is, that can't be right. What can't be right? The tactical officer checked his readings again. Sir, that mining laser just put out more concentrated energy than most of our heavy cruisers. That should be impossible for civilian equipment. Zektar felt the first stirring of real concern. One lucky shot could be explained, but this suggested preparation and planning on a scale that defied his intelligence estimates. All ships, increase scanning intensity. I want detailed analysis of every installation in this system. And bring us to battle alert. Across the solar system, the revelation that humanity's civilian installations were actually hidden weapons platforms sent shockwaves through the Imperial fleet. Suddenly, what had appeared to be a simple mop-up operation was looking much more complicated. On the mining platform, Chief Engineer Santos watched her targeting computer acquire another Imperial vessel. Target locked, reported her gunner, a young woman named Rebecca Kim, who had learned to operate military-grade weapon systems in just 3 weeks. Imperial frigate, bearing 27 Mark IV. Fire. The modified mining laser spoke again, and another Imperial ship died. But Santos knew they couldn't keep this up for long. Already, Imperial vessels were beginning to return fire, and her installation's armor, while improved, wasn't designed to withstand a sustained bombardment from military-grade weapons. How many more shots do we have? Asked Captain Torres. Santos checked her power readings. Maybe 6 or 7 before we need to recharge the capacitors. After that, we'll be vulnerable for about 3 minutes. Then, let's make them count. Similar scenes were playing out across the outer solar system as humanity's hidden weapons revealed themselves. The asteroid belt erupted with weapons fire as mining installations that had been dismissed as harmless civilian infrastructure suddenly began engaging Imperial forces with surprising effectiveness. The Empire's advance slowed as ship commanders realized they were advancing through a carefully prepared killing ground. What should have been a quick sweep to the inner system had become a running battle against dozens of hidden fortifications. But the humans were paying a price for their defiance. For every Imperial ship destroyed, 2 or 3 human installations were reduced to glowing slag by return fire. The brave volunteers manning those stations fought with desperate courage, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Admiral Zektar watched the tactical display update as his forces slowly but inexorably advanced through the outer system. The humans were fighting cleverly, using every advantage they could find, but mathematics was not on their side. In another hour, his fleet would reach the inner system, and then it would all be over. Sir, his intelligence officer reported, we've identified 47 hidden weapon installations so far. Our estimates suggest the humans have converted most of their civilian infrastructure into military assets. Impressive, Zektar admitted grudgingly. But ultimately futile. Continue the advance. Order all ships to prioritize the destruction of these hidden installations. I don't want any more surprises. What Admiral Zektar didn't know was that the outer system battle was just the first phase of humanity's defense plan. Every minute his forces spent fighting their way through the asteroid belt was another minute for the real surprise to prepare itself. On Earth, Dr. Hassan watched the battle reports streaming in from across the solar system. The outer defenses were performing better than expected, but they wouldn't last much longer. Soon, Admiral Chun would give the order to activate Project Atlas, and then they would learn whether humanity's most desperate gamble would pay off. Dr. Hassan, called Dr. Martinez from the main control console, were showing green lights across all systems. Atlas is ready for activation. Hassan nodded, her finger hovering over the activation switch. Around her, the other members of the project team stood at their stations, all of them volunteers who had chosen to remain despite knowing they would never survive the activation sequence. How long until the Imperial fleet reaches the inner system? She asked. Current projections show approximately 47 minutes before their advance guard engages our main fleet, replied Lieutenant Commander Walsh, the military liaison assigned to the project. Admiral Chun wants Atlas activated the moment they cross the Mars orbital line. Hassan looked around at her team one last time. These brave men and women represented the best of humanity's scientific community, and in a few minutes they would all be dead. But their sacrifice might save billions of lives across the galaxy. Teams, this is Dr. Hassan. You all know what's at stake here. You all know what's going to happen when we activate this device. I want you to know that it's been an honor working with you, and that what we're about to do will echo through history. Whether we succeed or fail, the galaxy will remember that humanity chose to fight for freedom. The responses came back from stations throughout the underground complex, each voice calm and determined despite the circumstances. Atlas Team Alpha, standing by. Atlas Team Beta, ready for activation sequence. Atlas Team Gamma, all systems nominal. Atlas Team Delta, standing by for final countdown. Hassan closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her daughter Sarah, currently serving aboard a destroyer in the outer system. She would never see her child again, but perhaps Sarah and her generation would live to see a galaxy free from Imperial tyranny. All teams, initiate final countdown sequence. Activation in T-minus 30 minutes, and counting. Deep beneath the Earth, the most powerful weapon in human history began its final preparations for activation. In orbit around the planet, the crew of the Constitution watched their tactical displays as the Imperial fleet ground through the outer system defenses like an unstoppable tide. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the icons representing her outer system forces wink out one by one as Imperial firepower overwhelmed the hidden installations. Each disappearing light represented dozens of brave souls who had chosen to stand and fight rather than surrender to tyranny. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, we've lost contact with installations 7, 12, and 23. Imperial Advance Guard is now approximately 1 hour from the Mars orbital line. Understood. Signal all ships to prepare for Phase 2 of the defense plan. Chen walked over to the communications console and opened a channel to the entire human fleet. What she was about to order would result in the deaths of thousands of brave men and women, but it was the only way to buy enough time for Project Atlas to work. All ships, this is Admiral Chun. In approximately 1 hour, we will engage the Imperial fleet in what may be the final battle for human freedom. I know the odds. You know the odds. But remember this, we are not fighting to win. We are fighting to make the Empire pay such a terrible price for victory that the galaxy will remember what happens when free people are pushed too far. She paused, looking out at the stars that had called to humanity for so long and thinking of all the dreams and aspirations that hung in the balance. Today, we make our stand. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. All ships, prepare for combat. May God have mercy on our souls. The response from her fleet was immediate and defiant. Aye, Admiral. See you in hell. Chen smiled grimly. That was exactly where they were all headed, but at least they would go there fighting. In the outer system, the last of the hidden installations finally succumbed to Imperial firepower. Chief Engineer Santos watched her control displays go dark one by one as critical systems failed under the relentless bombardment. That's it, she announced to her remaining crew. Main power is down, weapons are offline, and life support is failing. It's time to go. Captain Torres nodded reluctantly. They had done everything they could, holding up the Imperial advance for almost 2 hours and destroying more than 30 enemy vessels in the process. It was more than anyone had expected from a converted mining platform. "Chief, it's been an honor," Torres said, offering his hand. Santos shook it firmly. "The honor was mine, Captain. Now let's get to the escape pods before this place comes apart completely." As the survivors of Installation 17 evacuated their dying station, similar scenes were playing out across the outer system. The brave volunteers who had turned civilian infrastructure into weapons of war were finally being forced to abandon their positions, but they had accomplished their mission. The Imperial fleet's advance had been slowed by precious hours, and now the real battle was about to begin. Admiral Zektar reviewed the casualty reports from his advance through the asteroid belt with growing anger. He had expected to lose perhaps a dozen ships during the entire conquest of the human system. Instead, he had already lost over 40 vessels to what were supposedly civilian mining installations. The humans had been planning this defense for months, possibly years. Every piece of civilian infrastructure in their outer system had been converted into a weapons platform, and their crews had fought with a fanaticism that reminded him of the worst campaigns in Imperial history. "Admiral," his tactical officer announced, "our advance guard has reached the Mars orbital line. We're detecting the human fleet moving to intercept." Zektar looked at the tactical display and felt a moment of something resembling respect for his human opponents. 57 ships against the remaining 2,960 vessels of the Imperial fleet. It was suicide, but they were advancing anyway, their formation tight and disciplined despite the impossible odds. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships to battle stations. The humans want to die like warriors instead of surrendering like reasonable beings. We'll accommodate their wish." The Imperial fleet adjusted course to meet the advancing human ships, and space itself seemed to hold its breath as the two forces approached each other. In just a few minutes, the Battle of Seoul would begin in earnest. On the bridge of the Constitution, Admiral Chun watched the range to the Imperial fleet count down steadily. Her tactical display showed the enemy formation in perfect detail, a wall of steel and firepower that stretched across space like an approaching storm. "Admiral," her weapons officer reported, "we have firing solutions on the lead Imperial vessels. All ships report ready for combat. Signal the fleet, weapons free. All ships, attack pattern Delta. Show them what we can do." The human fleet suddenly accelerated, their formation shifting from a defensive line to an aggressive wedge aimed at the heart of the Imperial advance. It was a maneuver born of desperation and courage, a final gesture of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The Battle of Seoul had begun. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a miniature star being born. 57 human ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapons targeting the lead elements of the Imperial fleet with deadly precision. The Empire's advance guard, caught off guard by the sudden aggression of the human attack, staggered under the concentrated firepower. 3 Imperial cruisers died in the opening salvo, their shields overwhelmed by the coordinated assault. But the response was swift and devastating. 2,000 Imperial weapons spoke as one, and space filled with the deadly light of plasma cannons and particle beams. The human destroyer Defiance was the first to die, her hull cracking open under the concentrated fire of an entire Imperial battle group. The light cruiser Liberty followed moments later, her reactor containment failing in a brief flash that outshone the distant sun. But the human ships didn't retreat. Instead, they pressed their attack, diving deeper into the Imperial formation with reckless courage that bordered on madness. Their tactics were unlike anything Zektar had seen before. Instead of trying to preserve their forces for a prolonged engagement, they were spending their ships like ammunition, trading their lives for maximum damage to the enemy. The destroyer Yorktown rammed an Imperial dreadnought, her captain choosing to die taking one of the enemy's capital ships with her. The frigate Lexington detonated her own reactor in the middle of an Imperial squadron, the resulting explosion vaporizing 4 enemy vessels. It was glorious and terrible and utterly futile. For every Imperial ship the humans destroyed, they lost 2 or 3 of their own. Simple mathematics dictated that the battle could have only one outcome. But Admiral Chen wasn't trying to win the battle. She was trying to buy time. Admiral, her communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from Dr. Hassan. Project Atlas is ready for activation on your command. Chen looked at the tactical display. Half her fleet was already gone, and the surviving ships were taking heavy damage from the overwhelming Imperial firepower. But they had accomplished their mission. The enemy fleet was now well within the inner system, positioned exactly where Project Atlas needed them to be. Signal Dr. Hassan, she ordered. Execute Atlas. All ships, prepare for emergency burn away from Earth. Maximum acceleration. Deep beneath the Australian outback, Dr. Hassan received the activation order she had been waiting for. Around her, the Atlas control room buzzed with final preparations as her team initiated the sequence that would either save humanity or destroy it. All teams, this is Atlas Control. We have received activation authorization. Beginning final countdown sequence. T-minus 60 seconds, and counting. Hassan's finger moved to the activation switch, and she took one last look around the control room at the men and women who had chosen to sacrifice their lives for the future of their species. They were the best humanity had to offer, and in less than a minute they would all be dead. T-minus 30 seconds, she announced. All teams confirm ready status. The confirmations came back from across the underground complex as the weapon that could save or damn humanity prepared to activate for the first and last time. T-minus 10 seconds, Hassan called out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Activate Atlas. Dr. Hassan's finger pressed down on the activation switch, and the Earth itself became a weapon. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every piece of iron in the planet's core suddenly became a massive electromagnet, generating a magnetic field of unimaginable strength. The field propagated outward at the speed of light, washing over everything in the solar system in a wave of invisible force. The Imperial fleet, with their hulls full of metal components and electronics, found themselves caught in a magnetic field thousands of times stronger than anything they had been designed to withstand. Ships tumbled end over end as their navigation systems failed. Electronics overloaded and died. Weapons systems went offline. Life support flickered and failed. In seconds, the most powerful fleet in galactic history had been reduced to thousands of helpless hulks drifting in space. But the price was terrible. The activation of Project Atlas sent a shockwave through the Earth itself, triggering massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions across the planet's surface. The underground facility where Dr. Hassan and her team had made their stand was vaporized instantly, along with everything within a 100-kilometer radius. On the bridge of the Constitution, Admiral Chen watched her instruments go haywire as the Atlas field washed over her ship. But the human vessels had been hardened against the effect, their electronics shielded, and their hulls designed to withstand the electromagnetic pulse. As her systems came back online, Chen stared at her tactical display in amazement. The space around Earth was filled with Imperial ships, but none of them were moving. None of them were firing. They were just floating. "My God," whispered her tactical officer. "It actually worked. They're all dead in the water." Chen opened a communication channel to the surviving ships of her fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Atlas has been successfully activated. Begin recovery operations on Imperial vessels. We have a lot of prisoners to process." Across the solar system, the few remaining human ships moved among the drifting hulks of the Imperial fleet, rescuing survivors and securing vessels. The most powerful military force in galactic history had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by human ingenuity and the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. On the crippled Imperial flagship Dominion, Admiral Zektar tried to understand what had just happened. One moment his fleet had been on the verge of total victory, and the next every ship under his command had been reduced to a powerless hulk. "Report," he demanded of his crew. But most of his bridge officers were unconscious or dead, victims of the massive electromagnetic pulse that had swept through the ship. The few who remained conscious could only stare at their dead instruments and try to comprehend the magnitude of what the humans had achieved. They had turned their own planet into a weapon, sacrificing thousands of their own people to generate an electromagnetic field powerful enough to disable an entire fleet. It was brilliant. It was insane. It was the most ruthlessly effective military strategy Zektar had ever seen. A new voice cut through the static on his communication system. Imperial vessels, this is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. Your ships are disabled, and your weapons are offline. Surrender immediately, and you will be treated according to the laws of war. Resist, and you will be destroyed. Zektar looked around his ruined bridge at the few surviving members of his crew. They were trapped on a powerless ship, surrounded by an enemy fleet that had just demonstrated they were willing to sacrifice their own planet to achieve victory. For the first time in his 2-century career, Admiral Zektar, conqueror of 47 worlds, gave the order to surrender. The Battle of Seoul was over. Humanity had won. But, as Admiral Chun would soon learn, winning the battle was only the beginning. Word of humanity's victory was already spreading across the galaxy, carried by automated beacons and surviving scout ships. The message was simple and shocking. A primitive species had just defeated the most powerful military force in known space. The Galactic Empire, which had seemed invincible for over 1,000 years, had been brought to its knees by a species that had only recently learned to travel between the stars. The implications were staggering, and the galaxy would never be the same. On Earth, the cost of victory was becoming clear. The activation of Project Atlas had triggered massive geological instability across the planet. Cities lay in ruins from the earthquakes, and volcanic ash darkened the skies. Millions were dead or injured, and it would take decades for the planet to recover from the damage. But humanity was free. They had faced the choice between slavery and death, and they had chosen to fight. They had paid a terrible price for their freedom, but they had won it fair and square. As rescue operations continued across the solar system, Admiral Chun began to contemplate the future. The Empire would not simply accept defeat and move on. They would return with a larger fleet, better prepared for whatever weapons humanity might deploy against them. But they would return to face a different enemy. The species that had barely mastered space travel just months ago had proven they could defeat the galaxy's most powerful military force. Now they would have time to prepare, time to spread their technology and their message of freedom to other species across the galaxy. The war was far from over, but humanity had struck the first blow for freedom. And, as every human in history knew, the first blow was often the most important one. 6 months after the Battle of Seoul, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The news of humanity's impossible victory had spread like wildfire across thousands of star systems, carried by merchants, diplomats, and refugees fleeing the increasingly unstable empire. On the prison world of Kepler 442b, the alien slaves who had labored for decades in the Empire's mining facilities gathered around hidden communication devices to listen to the broadcasts from Earth. The humans were not only alive, they were thriving. More importantly, they were sharing their electromagnetic pulse technology with any species willing to stand up against imperial tyranny. Zarathek, a Vorthan engineer who had been enslaved for 23 years, listened to the latest human broadcast with something she had thought was dead forever: hope. Citizens of the galaxy, came the voice of Admiral Chun through the static of a long-range transmission. Humanity extends an invitation to all free peoples. We have proven that the Empire can be defeated. Join us. And together we can build a galaxy where no species lives in fear of conquest. Around Zarathek, other prisoners whispered excitedly in a dozen different languages. The humans weren't just offering military assistance. They were offering something far more valuable. They were offering the knowledge that victory was possible. "What do you think, Zara?" asked Kethmar, an elderly Quellan who had once been a respected scientist before his world fell to Imperial forces. "Can these humans really do what they claim?" Zarathek thought about the technical specifications that had been included in the human broadcasts. The electromagnetic pulse weapon was brilliant in its simplicity, using a planet's own magnetic field as a power source. With some modifications, the same principles could be applied to space stations, large asteroids, or even gas giants. "Yes," she said firmly. "They can do it. The question is whether we're brave enough to try." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Imperial guards approaching their barracks. Quickly, the prisoners scattered back to their bunks, hiding their communication device, and pretending to sleep. But the seed had been planted. Across the prison world, in whispered conversations and secret meetings, the enslaved races began to plan their own rebellion. Meanwhile, in the imperial capital of Nexus Prime, Emperor Valdris the Absolute listened to his military advisors debate their response to the human threat. The massive chamber echoed with the voices of generals and admirals, all offering different strategies for dealing with this unprecedented crisis. Your Majesty, argued Admiral Corex, we must respond immediately with overwhelming force. A fleet of 10,000 ships will succeed where Admiral Zektar's forces failed. And how exactly do you plan to overcome their electromagnetic weapons? Countered General Thane. Their technology turns our own ships against us. We need a different approach entirely. Emperor Valdris raised one scaled hand for silence. He had ruled the galaxy for over 3 centuries, expanding the empire from a single star system to a domain spanning thousands of worlds. In all that time, he had never faced a threat like this. Tell me about these humans, he commanded. What makes them so different from the other species we have conquered? His intelligence chief, a thin Nexari named Veltan, stepped forward with a data tablet. Your Majesty, our analysis suggests several unique factors. First, they have an unusual approach to warfare. Where most species fight to minimize casualties, humans appear willing to sacrifice everything for victory. Explain. During the Battle of Sol, human forces consistently chose tactics that maximized damage to our fleet while accepting catastrophic losses to their own forces. They rammed our ships, detonated their own reactors as weapons, and ultimately sacrificed their own planet's stability to activate their superweapon. This level of commitment to victory is unprecedented. Emperor Valdris frowned. In his experience, species that fought with such fanaticism were usually defending their homeworlds. But the humans had continued to demonstrate the same ruthless determination even after their victory, rapidly spreading their technology to other species and actively encouraging rebellion across imperial space. What else? They appear to have an unusual talent for innovation under pressure. The electromagnetic pulse weapon was developed and deployed in less than 6 months after first contact with our scouts. Our engineers estimate that such a project should have taken years, even for an advanced civilization. And their current activities? Veltan consulted his tablet again. They have established diplomatic contact with 47 different species across the Outer Rim territories. Intelligence suggests they are sharing military technology and providing strategic advice to potential rebel groups. In addition, they appear to be preparing their own expansion. Emperor Valdris stood and walked to the great windows that looked out over his capital city. Below him, billions of beings from across the galaxy lived and worked under imperial rule. The vast majority were content, even grateful for the peace and prosperity that the empire provided. But now that peace was being threatened by a species of primitives who refused to understand their place in the galactic order. How many worlds have we lost to rebellion? 17 confirmed, with another 33 showing signs of unrest. The pattern is consistent. Rebel groups obtain human electromagnetic pulse technology, disable our garrison fleets, and declare independence. And our response? Admiral Corex stepped forward. Your Majesty, we have deployed rapid response fleets to contain the rebellions. However, our forces are struggling to adapt to the new threat environment. The Emperor turned back to face his advisors. Struggling how? The electromagnetic pulse weapons are more effective than we initially calculated. Even ships hardened against the technology have suffered significant system failures when exposed to the new variants that the humans have developed. We estimate that our current fleet effectiveness has been reduced by approximately 60%. Emperor Valdris felt a chill run through him. The Empire's power was built on military superiority. If their fleets could be neutralized by this human technology, then the entire foundation of imperial rule was threatened. Recommendations? General Thane cleared his throat. Your Majesty, I believe we need to consider alternative approaches. The humans have demonstrated that they cannot be conquered by conventional means. Perhaps it is time to explore diplomatic options. The chamber fell silent. In 3 centuries of imperial expansion, the word diplomacy had rarely been spoken in the context of military planning. The Empire conquered. It did not negotiate. You are suggesting that we treat these primitives as equals? I am suggesting, Your Majesty, that we treat them as a threat that requires careful handling. Their technology is spreading faster than we can contain it. Within a year, half the galaxy could be in open rebellion. Emperor Valdris considered this. The logical part of his mind recognized that General Thane was probably correct. But accepting defeat at the hands of a species that had only recently learned to travel between stars would be a blow to imperial prestige that might never be recovered. No, he said finally. We are the Galactic Empire. We do not negotiate with rebels and primitives. Admiral Corex, prepare the Grand Fleet. If 10,000 ships are not enough, then we will send 50,000. On Earth, Admiral Chen stood in the rebuilt command center overlooking the ruins of Sydney. The activation of Project Atlas had devastated much of Australia, but the human survivors had worked tirelessly to rebuild. The new command center was better protected and more advanced than its predecessor, incorporating technology reverse-engineered from captured Imperial ships. Admiral, reported Colonel Morrison, we're receiving confirmation from the Kepler 442 system. The slave rebellion there was successful. They've disabled the Imperial garrison and declared independence. Chen nodded, marking another victory on her tactical display. 17 liberated worlds in 6 months, with more rebellions planned every week. The strategy was working better than she had dared to hope. What about the Vorthan engineers? Did they make it out safely? Yes, ma'am. Zarathek and her team are aboard a transport bound for the Centauri system. They volunteered to help upgrade our defensive installations there. Chen smiled. The Vorthans were natural engineers, and their expertise would be invaluable in preparing for the Empire's inevitable counterattack. Every liberated world brought new allies and new capabilities to the growing resistance. Any word from our deep space monitors? Long-range sensors are detecting increased activity in Imperial core systems. It looks like they're mobilizing a major fleet. Chen had been expecting this. The Empire couldn't allow the rebellions to continue spreading without a response. Soon, they would return to Sol in force, probably with enough ships to overwhelm even the improved Earth defenses. But humanity was no longer alone. 47 different species were now part of the resistance, each contributing their own unique abilities to the cause. The Vorthans provided engineering expertise. The Quellans offered advanced scientific knowledge. The Tkari contributed their mastery of stealth technology. Together, they were building something the galaxy had never seen before, a true alliance of free peoples. Colonel, signal all allied systems. Tell them it's time to implement Operation Liberty. The Empire is coming, and we need to be ready. Operation Liberty was humanity's most ambitious plan yet. Instead of waiting for the Empire to attack individual systems one by one, the Allied forces would coordinate a simultaneous assault on key Imperial strongholds across the galaxy. If successful, the operation would cripple the Empire's ability to maintain control over their vast domain. If it failed, the resistance would be crushed, and billions of beings would remain enslaved forever. But, as Admiral Chun had learned during humanity's darkest hour, sometimes the biggest risks offered the greatest rewards. Deep in the Vorthan home system, Zarathek worked alongside human engineers to prepare the system's defenses. The Vorthan homeworld had been conquered by the Empire 40 years ago, but it had never been forgotten by its scattered children. Now, with human support, they had a chance to reclaim their heritage. The magnetic field generators are in position, reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the human scientist overseeing the installation. We should be able to generate a pulse strong enough to disable any Imperial fleet within 3 light minutes. Zarathek examined the technical specifications with professional admiration. The humans had taken their crude but effective electromagnetic pulse weapon and refined it into something truly elegant. This new version could be precisely controlled, allowing defenders to disable enemy ships without damaging their own vessels or civilian infrastructure. How many other systems have this technology now? 37 confirmed installations, with more being completed every week. By the time the Empire mobilizes their response fleet, we should have over 60 systems protected by pulse weapons. Zarathek felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. For 40 years, Her people had dreamed of liberation. Now, with human help, that dream was becoming reality. Dr. Kim, I want you to know that my people will never forget what humanity has done for us. You didn't have to share your technology. You didn't have to risk war with the Empire. But you did it anyway. Dr. Kim smiled and placed a hand on the Vorthan engineer's shoulder. Zara, my species learned long ago that freedom is worthless unless it's shared. We're not fighting for humanity alone. We're fighting for the right of every intelligent being in the galaxy to live free from tyranny. As they spoke, similar conversations were taking place across dozens of star systems as humans and aliens worked together to prepare for the coming storm. The Empire was vast and powerful, but the resistance was growing stronger every day. On the Imperial world of Terminus, Admiral Corex reviewed the deployment orders for the Grand Fleet. 50,000 ships representing the core military strength of the Empire were being assembled for the largest military operation in galactic history. The fleet was so massive that it had to be divided into multiple task forces, each one larger than most entire star navies. Admiral, his aide reported, we've received the final intelligence briefing on human capabilities. The analysis is concerning. Corex took the data tablet and scanned the contents. In 6 months, human technology had advanced at an unprecedented rate. Their electromagnetic pulse weapons were now significantly more powerful and precise than the crude device used at Sol. More troubling, they had shared this technology with dozens of other species, creating a network of fortified systems that would be extremely difficult to assault. Estimated casualties for a direct assault on the Sol system? Between 30 and 40% of the attacking force, assuming the humans haven't developed any new surprises. However, intelligence suggests that they have been working on several classified projects that could significantly increase our losses. Corex frowned. Those were unacceptable casualties for a single system, especially given that Sol was just one of many targets that would need to be retaken. But Emperor Valdris had been clear. The human rebellion had to be crushed completely, regardless of the cost. What about the other rebel systems? Each fortified system would likely cost us 10 to 15% casualties. With 47 systems currently in rebellion, a complete reconquest campaign would result in the loss of approximately 70% of the Grand Fleet. Admiral Corex set down the tablet and looked out at the massive fleet assembling in orbit around Terminus. These were the finest ships and crews in the Empire, representing centuries of military tradition and technological advancement. The thought of sacrificing most of them in a grinding campaign against fortified positions was almost unbearable. But the alternative was worse. If the rebellion continued to spread, the Empire itself would collapse within a few years. Better to pay a terrible price for victory than to watch everything they had built crumble into chaos. Signal the fleet commanders, he ordered. We depart for Sol in 72 hours. The glory of the Empire will be restored, whatever the cost. As the Grand Fleet prepared for departure, deep space monitoring stations throughout the galaxy detected the massive buildup of Imperial forces. The information was quickly relayed to Earth and the other allied systems, confirming what everyone had been expecting. The Empire was preparing for total war. On Earth, Admiral Chun convened an emergency meeting of the Allied Defense Council. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the rebuilt command center to coordinate their response to the Imperial threat. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings, Chun began. Our scouts confirm that the Empire is mobilizing the largest fleet in galactic history. 50,000 ships are being assembled for an assault on our systems. This is the moment we have been preparing for. The chamber buzzed with worried conversation as the representatives absorbed the implications. 50,000 Imperial ships represented a level of force that could overwhelm any single system's defenses, no matter how well prepared. What are our options? Asked Ambassador Tele K, the Quellan representative. Operation Liberty remains our best chance, Chun replied. Instead of waiting for the Empire to attack us individually, we strike first at their key strongholds. If we can capture or destroy their major fleet bases, their ability to maintain the assault will be severely compromised. And if Operation Liberty fails? Chun was quiet for a moment, thinking of all the brave souls who had sacrificed themselves for freedom over the past 6 months. Then, We make them pay such a terrible price for victory that the galaxy will remember what happens when free people are pushed too far. The vote was unanimous. Operation Liberty would proceed as planned. Across the galaxy, the Allied fleets began their final preparations for the most ambitious military operation in history. Human ships equipped with advanced electromagnetic pulse weapons would lead the assault on Imperial strongholds while Allied forces provided support and secured key objectives. The plan was audacious almost to the point of madness. The combined Allied fleet numbered fewer than 5,000 ships, and they were preparing to attack the most heavily fortified positions in Imperial space. But if they could succeed in destroying the Empire's key infrastructure, the massive Grand Fleet would be stranded far from its supply bases and vulnerable to piecemeal destruction. As the countdown to Operation Liberty began, Admiral Chen stood once again on the observation deck of the rebuilt command center, looking up at the stars. In just a few hours, the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Either the Resistance would strike a blow for freedom that would echo through history, or they would all die fighting for the principles they believed in. Either way, humanity would face its destiny with courage and determination. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to surrender now. The final battle for galactic freedom was about to begin. Operation Liberty commenced at 0400 Galactic Standard Time, with coordinated strikes on 17 Imperial strongholds across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Human-led task forces materialized out of hyperspace simultaneously, their electromagnetic pulse weapons devastating the unprepared Imperial defenses. At the Nexus Secondary Fleet Base, Admiral Chen's flagship Constitution led a force of 800 Allied ships against one of the Empire's most important military installations. The base's orbital defense platforms tried to respond to the sudden attack, but their weapons systems failed as the human pulse technology washed over them in waves of invisible force. All weapons platforms neutralized, reported her tactical officer. The base is defenseless. Signal the landing forces, Chen ordered. Secure the installation and download all intelligence data. We have 20 minutes before Imperial reinforcements can arrive. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as the Allied forces struck with precision and overwhelming firepower. The Empire's defensive strategy had been built around the assumption that their enemies would use conventional weapons and tactics. They were completely unprepared for coordinated strikes using electromagnetic pulse technology. But the Empire's response was swift and devastating. Within hours of the initial attacks, Imperial Reserve fleets were converging on the battle sites. The Allies had achieved tactical surprise, but they were still vastly outnumbered by the Empire's total military strength. On the bridge of the Imperial dreadnought Eternal Glory, Admiral Corex received reports from across the war zone. The rebels had struck simultaneously at 17 different targets, suggesting a level of coordination and strategic planning that he had not expected from such a loose alliance. Casualties? He demanded. Severe, sir. We've lost contact with 8 major installations, and the others are reporting significant damage. Estimated losses are over 200 ships and approximately 50,000 personnel. Corex felt his anger building. These primitives and their rebel allies had just inflicted more damage on the Imperial Navy in one day than had been suffered in the previous decade of conquest operations. Signal the Grand Fleet. We advance immediately to Seoul. If these humans want a war, we will give them one they will never forget. The massive Imperial fleet began its advance toward human space, but they were no longer facing the same enemy they had encountered 6 months ago. The combined Allied forces had struck a devastating blow against Imperial infrastructure, and now they were preparing to make the Empire pay an even higher price for their aggression. As Admiral Chen's forces withdrew from the Nexus Secondary Fleet Base, her intelligence officers were already analyzing the data they had captured. What they found changed everything. Admiral, reported Colonel Morrison, you need to see this. We've uncovered the Empire's contingency plans for dealing with the rebellion. Chen studied the captured intelligence data with growing horror. The Empire wasn't just planning to reconquer the rebel systems. They were planning to implement what they called the final solution, the complete extermination of any species that had participated in the rebellion. Humanity, the Vorthans, the Quellans, the Tkari, and 43 other species were marked for total genocide. The Empire intended to erase them from the galaxy entirely as an example to any future rebels. Get this information to all Allied systems immediately, Chen ordered. Everyone needs to know what we're really fighting for. As the news of the Empire's genocidal intentions spread across Allied space, something fundamental changed in the nature of the conflict. This was no longer a war for political freedom. It was a war for survival. Every being in the Allied systems now knew that surrender meant extinction. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Volunteer fleets from dozens of species converged on human space, determined to make their stand alongside the species that had shown them freedom was possible. By the time the Imperial Grand Fleet reached the outer edge of the Sol system, they found themselves facing not just the human navy, but a combined force representing 47 different species united in their determination to remain free. Admiral Corex stared at his tactical display in disbelief. Instead of the small human fleet he had expected to face, his sensors showed over 6,000 Allied ships in defensive positions throughout the system. The rebels had turned Sol into the most heavily fortified star system in galactic history. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting massive electromagnetic pulse generators positioned throughout the system. Energy readings suggest they're significantly more powerful than anything we faced during the first battle." Corex realized that the humans had spent the past 6 months doing more than just spreading their technology to other species. They had been improving it, refining it, and turning their entire system into one massive weapon. "Signal the fleet," he ordered grimly. "All ships to battle stations. Today we end this rebellion once and for all." The Second Battle of Sol was about to begin, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But this time, humanity would not stand alone against tyranny. They had allies, they had hope, and they had something the Empire had never faced before, a united front of species willing to die for their freedom. As the two massive fleets prepared for combat, the galaxy held its breath. The outcome of this battle would determine whether the age of imperial dominance would continue, or whether a new era of freedom and cooperation would begin. The final confrontation between tyranny and liberty was about to unfold among the stars.